Welcome to the Mike Graham Show. Today, we've got some great stories for you, right? The latest from Rachel Reeves, who's now telling a load of lies about an OECD report that says we're going to have the worst inflation in the G7, thanks to her budget. Well done, Rachel. We're going to be talking about Christmas because it's only 20 days away, and we've got a special surprise for you from Meghan Markle. Also, we'll find out why Jaguar Land Rover have managed to sack the guy who came up with that ludicrous idea of turning all their cars pink and woke. He's out. And also we'll talk a bit about war, because it's quite important, this. Well, there's an awful lot to deal with this morning, isn't there? I mean, first of all, and rather importantly, there seems to be a war kind of being threatened on the borders of Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Vladimir Putin has been having peace talks with the United States of America, but in the middle of it all, despite the fact that Special Envoy to Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, has been at the Kremlin talking to Vladimir Putin has decided that actually he's not really having any of talk of a peace deal. And he basically said just the other day, well, if Europe wants a war, they can have one. We're ready. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not ready for a war. I'd rather not actually have a war with Russia. I'd rather not be going to war and sending our troops in, because apart from anything else, we haven't really got very many troops and we're not very well trained for a war. I mean, Keir Starmer keeps telling us, do you remember, it wasn't that many months ago that he said, we're on a war footing, we are on a war footing. And, you know, quite frankly, we couldn't be any further away from a war footing. You know, we've got troops that literally haven't got enough clothes to wear, haven't got the right boots, haven't got enough guns, haven't got enough bullets, haven't really got enough warships. We haven't really got enough planes. You know, we haven't really got anything. And the idea that we're going to sort of do some kind of coalition of the willing, as Keir Starmer likes to call it, is nonsensical. But Vladimir Putin, as I say, has been talking to Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and he's been talking to this guy, Steve Witkoff, as well. But as a result of their very, very long and drawn-out conversation, he decided to send 111 drones into Dnipro the night before last and kill a few people in Ukraine. The war is still going on. Meanwhile, for those of you who were paying attention, you might have heard the dulcet tones of Volodymyr Zelensky, who decided to visit Ireland. This is a guy who has more foreign trips than Keir Starmer. You know, he's never in Ukraine. He's always travelling somewhere. And he was talking to the Irish Parliament just the other day, talking about how important it was that the Western Alliance kind of backed him up. And I've got a couple of questions about that, really, because you know as well as I do, we've spent billions and billions of pounds back in the day when the war broke out and Boris Johnson thought he was, you know, Mr. Peacemaker and he was going to save the world. And I think he's got a road named after him in Kiev, or Kiev, as I prefer to call it. But so Zelensky, who's been in receipt of billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of pounds of our money, doesn't seem to be, I don't know, doing very much with it. I'm slightly sceptical, shall we say, as many of you are, about giving him any more, right? And here's the latest, right, this morning. The Kremlin have said it's wrong to say that Putin rejected the peace plan. Donald Trump says that territory and guarantees are among the most difficult questions. The people of Ukraine, and I've got a lot of time for many of the people in Ukraine, many of the politicians that I've spoken to over the course of the last couple of years. They're very, very strong people. I always remember the day that war broke out, we ended up speaking, I think, on that particular morning, to a woman who was an MP in the Parliament in Kiev, and you could literally hear the tanks rolling in, you could hear the missiles being fired, you could hear explosions going off everywhere, and she was standing by her window, and I always remember this, she was looking out the window, and I said to her, you know, presumably, I said, as the Russian tanks move in, because everyone thought they were going to basically invade Kiev and it was all going to be over, I said, I assume you're going to just get out of town before it gets too dangerous, and she went, no, we're going to stay and fight. I was like, what? You're going to stay and fight? Incredible. And so this female MP I thought was really remarkable, and I take my hat off to people like her. But I do worry that an awful lot of the money that has gone into the Ukrainian sort of war effort has somehow been, shall we say, removed by certain individuals. I mean, I walk around some quite expensive parts of London from time to time, where I go to the gym, for example, which I've never really talked about, but I will talk about at some point on this new show, the Mike Graham Show. It's sort of somewhere between Mayfair and Marylebone, right? And so there's quite a lot of very expensive cars. You see a lot of Mercedes S-classes. You see a lot of Mercedes G-wagons. And every now and again, I'll come across a massive, great new car, either a Lamborghini, or maybe a 4x4 or a massive great big Land Rover or a Range Rover with Ukrainian plates on it, and we're talking about cars that are worth in excess of 100,000 quid, maybe 150,000 quid, and they're just sitting there, parked up, and there'll be a guy sitting in there, and you're thinking to yourself, hang on a minute, you're supposed to be at war, right? You're supposed to be fighting, but you're quite a young man, and you're in a car with Ukrainian plates in London, which is worth an awful lot of money. And I'm not saying that, that's because of ill-gotten gains that they've managed to get their hands on from money that we've given them. But you have to ask the question, don't you? That, billions and billions of pounds, lots of weapons, lots of help, lots of aid coming from all over the place. Donald Trump cleverly has agreed never to give them any more money and has made the Europeans give more money. And Starmer's so stupid that he just keeps coughing it up. But there's something very wrong about the whole situation. And I think most of us would rather obviously not have a war with Europe and Russia. But also most of us will say to the Ukrainians, well, you might just have to swallow giving up a bit of land. You might just have to swallow giving up Odessa. Or you might just have to swallow giving up some of the eastern regions that Russia wants back, or Crimea, or something. All I know is that at the moment, Marco Rubio, who's the American Secretary of State, is saying that some progress is being made. And they're hopeful of getting some kind of peace deal. But at the end of the day, the Russians are never going to stop, because one of the things I remember watching some of those war movies, when you watch Apocalypse Now and you watch Marlon Brando and he talks about how you can't beat people who are willing to die, basically. And the Russians, while they may not be volunteering to die, they may not be actually happy to die, are dying in huge numbers because they get conscripted by Putin, they go into fight, and they basically have to do what they're told. And if it ends up with them dying, then that's the way it is. In Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando tells a story of how the Americans went into a particular Vietnam village and they vaccinated all the kids. And he said the Viet Cong came in, the VC, as they used to be called, who were absolutely fanatical. And because they didn't want the locals to be in any way grateful to the Americans for doing something for them, they cut off all their arms. And he was like, imagine the power of something like that. Imagine the ability of a fighting force to be able to do that, to have that kind of discipline. He said you can never beat them. I know it's a horrible story, but it's supposed to be a true story. And in the end, the Russians cannot be beaten by Ukraine because it doesn't really matter how many weapons Ukraine has. The Russians will fight to the death, and they don't care if they die. Here's a quote from Yuri Ushakov, who said that after 5 hours of discussions the other day, no compromise has been reached on the core issue of Ukraine's territory, so they're no closer to resolving the crisis. So I think we're going to be dealing with this for a while. Donald Trump, of course, did say he was going to solve it in 24 hours. Yeah, but that's the kind of thing he says. I just think we have to be really careful that we don't commit ourselves in any way, shape or form, militarily, financially, or in any other way, to some kind of a BS coalition of the willing, just so that Keir Starmer can get his name on a street sign in Ukraine. Do you know what I mean? The other thing, of course, which you have to worry about is that because Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are so unpopular in their own countries, Macron absolutely hated in France, Starmer detested in the United Kingdom, right? They're so desperate to find some kind of recognition around the world for doing something good that they will put their sort of clown shoes on and go wandering about in places where they shouldn't go. Because let's not forget, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said before that when the peace deal was trying to be struck between Hamas and Israel, that whole situation was made so much worse by the fact that the French and the British, under the guise of Starmer and Macron, decided to recognise Hamas, right? And decided to say that they were going to recognise them as a party to actually do a conversation with. And Rubio said that really, really derailed the peace process. And what we don't want is that if Donald Trump has managed to get these people to the table, he's managed to get Vladimir Putin to sit down and actually talk about the possibility of peace with Ukraine. What we don't need is the coalition of the willing, either in the form of Macron or in the form of Starmer, screwing it all up. Because that's the other worry, isn't it? So just as a point of order, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who has signed up for our Substack, which of course is the MikeGrahamShow.com, and also who have actually joined the YouTube channel that we've got, which is also the Mike Graham Show, because it's been quite remarkable. It's the 4th day of our existence in this new space, in this new world, and it's been really, really gratifying to know how many of you are so delighted to see me back on the airwaves and giving you my version of what I think the world should be like, right? And I'm going to read out some of the incredible comments that I've had on YouTube, of course, on Twitter, of course, as well, and also on Facebook. I mean, yesterday we talked about David Lammy. We talked about the terrible state of the NHS and how doctors are going to go on strike. We talked about Rachel Reeves. We talked about the terrible situation in Tunbridge Wells where they haven't had water for 4 days, 14,000 people, absolutely unbelievable. One here from Lee Webb who says, Mike Graham, legend. Trish says this, my husband and I are absolutely delighted to see you back and know you will get many more followers. This is just the start. Thanks for always being direct and saying what many people feel, which is lovely. And good morning, Mike. Talk radio isn't the same without you. I'm not very bright, Mike, but I'm bright enough to know not to go on Mastermind in front of millions of viewers, which of course is what David Lammy did. This from Ben, who said, awesome that you've got so many followers. I'm heading over now to drop you a subscription. Mike Fairclough, outstanding and extremely well deserved. Alison says, well done, Mike. I can't wait for your show to go live, which is happening very soon. Onwards and upwards. Emma says this, I'm loving what you're doing, Mike. No one can hold a torch to you. Once your live show gets going, you will be unstoppable. Lady Maggie, well done, Mike. It will only get better. So good to have you back on the mornings. Bring it on. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Mike, for being there for all of us, says Joan. We'll be here for you too. One here from Antonio. So good to have Mike back again. Absolutely brilliant. Chris says, loved it. Better when you had your shirt and tie on. You stood out amongst all other presenters. Well, there's one for you. I don't know. Should I wear a tie? At the moment, I'm going with a shirt and a jacket. But I'll certainly take your advice once we start the live show. Should I put a tie back on? We shall see. Good start, Mike. I think you should lose the corner angle, says Chrissy, and put your desk in front of a Thames scene. Well, maybe. I mean, you know, at the moment we're experimenting with all sorts of different venues. As you can see, we're in a new one now today. Just so good to have you back on air, says Mr. B. Mike, keep doing what you do. I haven't watched Talk since the day they took you off air. Please, we can listen to you, says Francis. I think you are worth more than YouTube. You are broadcast royalty. Well, there's nothing wrong with YouTube. I mean, YouTube is great. And I took these photos at 7:15 Monday morning, says Ian, showing how well we're doing. And this one from Claire says, well done, Mike. Absolute champion, says Mike in Essex. And it's absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. Strength through adversity, says Monkey. So keep all of those coming in because it's always lovely to hear from you. And I'm always very, very happy to read them out. Let's see if we've got any on Facebook here. Here's one from Robert. It says, hello, Mike. I can't say how great it is to have you back. And excellent stuff on Lammy, the Dodger, the Red Leicester, smells everywhere. Robert in Glasgow says that. So many of you have got so much to say. Top quality show, Mike. Fantastic free speech. Great to have you back. That's from Tony. Nice one, Mike. Looking refreshed and raring to go, says Paul. And here's one from James, who says, basically, you are so welcome back. It's been too long. And there we are. So listen, you can find us on Facebook, obviously. You can find us on Twitter at IROMG. It's the Mike Graham Show on YouTube and the Substack if you'd like to go along and subscribe for all the extra content that you're going to be getting. That is, of course, the MikeGrahamShow.com. Oh, and just before I go, there's something come in from a K Starmer in Camden. Part of North London, you know what I mean? He says, Mike, I thought we'd managed to get rid of you. Can you please leave me alone? Stop bothering me. No. So it was Prime Minister's questions yesterday. I don't know if it's the last one before Christmas, but you know, Rachel Reeves is still right in the thick of it, right? There's an OECD report out today. Sorry, in which they say that basically inflation is going to be the highest ever in the G7, thanks to her useless budget. She, of course, has something different to say about all of that. And there's also been some questions cast about her claims to be a chess champion. We'll get into that in a minute. But I've just got a statement from her, right, which I'm about to read to you. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York. And all the clouds that lured upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried, now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments. No, sorry, it's actually Richard III. It's not her at all. Easy mistake to make. So anyway, listen, back to Rachel Thieves, as we like to call her, or Richard III, as it was known. What a terrible week she's had, right? But she can't stop telling lies, right? So the OECD, which is a big sort of international organisation that tracks finance and tracks economies and tells people what's likely to happen in the sort of coming year, coming 6 months, and all of that. After the Office of Budget Responsibilities appearing before the Treasury Select Committee this week, right, and after the sacking of Richard Hughes, or the resignation, if you like, people are starting to ask questions. They're going, hang on a minute, this guy Richard Hughes has basically just taken the fall to stop Rachel Reeves from being fired, right? Yesterday in Parliament, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Tory party, actually accused Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves of throwing this guy Richard Hughes under the bus in order just to protect themselves, because they think, because he's taken the flack and he's taken the fall, not only for the fact that the budget was a complete and utter mess, but also for the fact that it was leaked 40 minutes before it was actually announced by Rachel Reeves in Parliament, a week ago. He's basically supposedly the end of the story, but he can't be the end of the story because there are so many questions still about exactly what she was doing a month before the budget was actually announced. The fact that she was leaking constantly to journalists, the fact that she was telling people that she was going to have to put income tax up, the fact that she misled Parliament and misled the country and misled her own cabinet about the fact that there was actually a better financial position in the Treasury than they were letting on because they wanted to spend more money. So they were pretending, right, that actually the economy was in a worse state than it was in order to basically make sure that they could raise £26 billion more in tax from us in order to give it to the feckless, to the people who've got 7 kids, to all of these people who have come here from abroad, who are living in, reasonably good council housing because we've given them free stuff. Absolutely unbelievable. The welfare budget is what it's become known as. The benefits party is now what the government is known as, not the Labour Party, because they don't work for working people. They actually only work for people who are on benefits. It's absolutely staggering, incredible. But, Rachel Reeves, who can't stop lying, got sight of this OECD report in which they said basically that things are going to be bad. Inflation is going to be at its highest rate ever in the G7. She actually came out and said that the OECD had praised her, which is incredible, right? I mean, basically, she said that the OECD report has said that inflation is actually going to come down, which is exactly not what they said, So it's quite incredible what is going on in this economy and in this government. Because at the end of the day, the OECD report says that this economy is basically now screwed. We will not have any growth for years and years and years. And at the end of the day, it's all bad news. She's still trying to make out that they're in support of her. But if you want to know about how Rachel Reeves really operates, and if you want to know why she seems to be such a congenital liar, you don't have to look any further than her claims that she was a great chess player, right? Because the story started to appear yesterday, and this is from the Telegraph. In an interview with The Guardian in 2023, Rachel Reeves said, these are her words, "I played chess. I was the British girls under-14 champion." Well, she wasn't. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's BS. It's absolute cobblers. She's a dunderhead. She's an absolute dunderhead. Because Alex Edmonds, who's a former junior chess champion, gave an interview and he said she only came joint 26th out of 34 in a competition. He said he'd never heard of her as a young player, even though she was only a year senior to him. And he said, basically, and this is really important, he said her claim about being the under-14 champion is false. That's his word, false. That means she lied. So she lied a couple of years ago when she talked about what she did as a teenager, right? Mr. Edmonds said the Chancellor won, in reality, Mr. Edmonds said the Chancellor won the under-14 title for the British Women's Chess Association Girls' Championship, as well as 3 other accolades. That is very different to the British Girls' Championship, which is clearly defined as the girl who does best in the British Championship. She may well have won some titles, but the title of British Girls' Champion is a specific event. They have their own championship, and then you become the British Girls' Champion. And that was not what she was. So basically, Rachel Reeves, here's the moral of the story, is that Rachel Reeves has been lying ever since she's been a teenager, right? She says people have underestimated her all her life. Well, yeah, people have also presumably known that she just tells lies. I mean, she lied about being an economist at the Bank of England for 10 years because she wasn't there for 10 years, and it's unclear whether she was actually an economist there. She lied about then going into the private sector, into the retail banking sector, and said that she was an economist there when she wasn't. She was Rachel from accounts or Rachel from complaints. The bottom line is that Rachel Reeves is a liar. I'm sorry to use those words, but they're the only words that you can say, because that is the truth. And I don't even understand how she's even still in the job. Surely, to heavens, she can't last. Surely not. Talking of chess, do you remember a guy called Garry Kasparov? He was one of the greatest chess players of all time, right? And there were terribly important matches that used to take place. And some of them were sort of billed as Russia against America and all of that kind of thing. But Garry Kasparov apparently was so good at chess that the chances of anyone beating him was something like 1,000,000 to 1, right? IBM, the computer company, came up with a computer to try and beat him called Deep Blue. Some of you might be old enough to remember that. And they spent millions and millions of dollars trying to find a way of beating Garry Kasparov. Rachel Reeves, on the other hand, if you want to beat her at chess, I mean, I dare say there's a number of things you could do. You could just play her at chess, because she's apparently not that good. You know, she claims to be a chess champion, but she wasn't. That was a lie. But she probably thought she was playing drafts. But here's the thing. Unless she was wearing chainmail and had a broadsword and had some kind of, visor with a helmet on, I think that's the only way that she would be able to beat you. The woman is completely and utterly deranged. I don't know what's going on with her. To be honest, there's only one conclusion you can draw. She is an absolute muttonhead. So guess who's back in the news? Jaguar Land Rover. You remember them? Go woke, go broke, and all of that sort of thing. Nigel Farage had a go at them. Donald Trump had a go at them. Elon Musk had a go at them. You might remember back in the early part of this year, they decided to rebrand themselves, Jaguar Land Rover, particularly Jaguar. They got away from what they thought was the Jagman image, right? And you remember when they were an incredibly successful company, and they represented everything really that sort of great British trade stood for. Remember the E-Type Jaguar back in the 1960s? One of the adverts they had there was of a beautiful young woman sort of draped over the bonnet, because it was a very sort of phallic looking car, and it was a great car, and everybody wanted one. I remember as a kid, I was like, one of these days, if I'm old enough and I'm rich enough, I'm going to have an E-Type Jag, and everybody wanted one, right? Then they sort of moved off into the electric cars. They moved off into doing the 4x4s, the F-Pace. They ended up making a great sports car. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, and nobody knows why, they decided to rebrand themselves as kind of, almost like a trans car company, right? And they produced this ridiculous advert in which they had a load of, what can only be described as, sexually, shall we say, fluid people, throwing paint all over the place and sort of poncing around and dancing about and looking ridiculous, and talking about make change happen. They changed the logo. They got rid of, famously, and I know you'll like me saying this, the ginger growler. Sorry, not the ginger growler, that's somebody else. No, just the growler, which was the badge on the front of the car. It was, it was a Jaguar, which happens to be one of the big cats, like a leopard. And they got rid of it. And they changed the font of the word Jaguar, and they made it into this kind of ridiculous looking thing. Anyway, it turns out that it completely destroyed the company, basically. And so this week, just a couple of days ago, a guy by the name of Jerry McGovern, who was formerly Jaguar Land Rover's chief creative officer, was fired. Right? He'd been there 21 years. He was responsible for the new Defender, coming up with a new design for that. He was responsible for the new Range Rovers and all of the shapes that they've got now, which are very successful. But he was basically marched out of the building where he worked, which was extraordinary, right? And you kind of go, what's going on with this, right? He was escorted out of the office, according to reports. JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, owned now by Indian conglomerate Tata, basically said Tata to Jerry McGovern. He was dismissed with immediate effect. I know a bit about that, obviously. It was just days after the former finance boss of Tata Motors was made the new chief executive, a bloke by the name of P.B. Balaji, right? And it brought a 21-year career to an end, right? Incredible. The whole idea was that they wanted, you might remember this pink car that they came up with, which looked a bit like Lady Penelope's car from Thunderbirds, and everybody kind of went, have you gone mad? Elon Musk, I remember, sent a tweet out which said, are you guys still actually making cars? Because the advert that they put out, which was full of all these kind of people trans people, whatever, didn't actually have a car in it. And when they showed these kind of prototypes, it was extraordinary. And I remember having conversations with people like Steve Berry, former Top Gear man, who said, "You're just so out of the loop, Mike. You know, they don't want people like you anymore. They don't want, you know, your sort of middle-aged, you know, white, heterosexual man driving their cars. They want to appeal to a younger audience." Well, I'm sorry. I mean, I talk to a lot of young people. Some of them are my children. And they're not that fussed about cars, to be honest. They're not that fussed about owning cars. They're not that fussed about brands in particular of cars, unless they're real enthusiasts about actual individual cars. They're quite happy just renting a car for the day or driving a car that somebody else owns. You know, they're not that bothered. But so Jaguar literally cut their own throats. And they ended up where they couldn't sell any cars at all anywhere because people were kind of confused. Because if you're driving around in an F-Pace, you were driving around in an X-Type or an S-Type or whatever it is, and some of the electric cars that they did, you're kind of going, am I just now redundant? You know, do Jaguar not want me as a customer anymore? Do they just want to shun me and pretend that I'm not there? Are they ashamed of me because I happen to be kind of, you know, in my 50s and middle class and reasonably well off and reasonably happy? Do they just not want me anymore so that they can appeal to a lot of people down in Florida driving around South Beach? I mean, it's just very, very odd. And so, and then of course, what happened was they got hacked. Do you remember? And it was some months ago now, but they were out of commission for about 3 months. They couldn't sell any cars. They completely shut down their production plant because they couldn't work out what had happened, and they didn't know who had hacked them. They didn't know why. And then, of course, we had Donald Trump's tariffs that kicked in, and cars started to cost a lot more money in America. So they basically didn't sell any cars into America for about 3 months. And it's still not very clear how easy it is for them to do that now. But it's just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, the whole idea of Jaguar, one of the great British marques, and I say that with a Q-U-E-S, has kind of literally pulled the rug from under its own feet and collapsed in on itself. And now they've just fired the guy who was responsible for some of the best designs of cars that they've had for the last 21 years. Basically, what they said at the time when they did all this was that they wanted to re-establish the brand and at a completely different price point. But it's all failed. It's all been a complete and utter disaster. So who knows what the future holds for Jaguar Land Rover, but what I can tell you is you won't want to buy any of their cars because they're just not any good. Jaguar, I wouldn't be at all surprised, will probably end up retiring the brand altogether. Who knows? And speaking of cars, by the way, thanks to Rachel Reeves, Richard III, I don't know what sort of car she's got, a ministerial Land Rover, no doubt, or Range Rover, because there's loads of those. The problem for people now is if you've got an electric car, because you thought you were doing the right thing and virtue signalling your way to heaven because you weren't going to have to pollute the country and you wouldn't pollute the world because you'd be driving around in this beautiful, smooth, you know, non-fueled machine, right? But now you're going to have to pay 3p a mile every time you go anywhere. You're going to have to pay road tax because apparently, according to Ed Miliband's favourite chancellor, despite the fact that you're saving the planet, you now have to pay for the road that you drive on. And Rachel Reeves actually said this. She said, look, the reason that we're giving people road tax to pay because they've got electric cars is because everybody uses the roads and everybody should pay. Which, of course, is completely the opposite of what Ed Miliband says. He says, well, if you've got an electric car, you should be rewarded by not having to pay. But the people who are really going to get screwed here are people who've got plug-in hybrid cars. And you may be one of them. They're going to get a levy of 1.5 pence a mile charged from 2028 under the Electric Vehicle Excise Duty, EVED, they're going to call it. But of course, despite the fact that Rachel Reeves introduced this in the budget last week, she still doesn't know how it's going to work. She was actually asked live on TV in an interview, how are you going to collect this money? How are you going to know exactly what mileage people are doing? And do you know what she said? She actually said, well, of course, when people go in to get their car MOT'd, the mileage is recorded. And when it was pointed out to her that if you've got a new car, you don't have to get an MOT for 3 years, she was like, well, this is why we're not introducing it till 2028, because we want to make sure we're going to get it right. Well, you're not going to get it right, are you? She's basically saying she's hoping that when you get in your car, you will record exactly how many miles you've driven, and then you'll send it off to the government so they can tax you for it. like that's going to work. Really? Seriously? She doesn't seem to have any understanding whatsoever about the real world, right? And according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, there's 190,240 plug-in hybrids sold this year alone, 37% more than last year. And I've always thought, listen, if you're going to try and save the planet and if you're going to try and do the right thing, well, surely a sort of hybrid's quite a good idea, isn't it? Because you are able to use some of the electricity to power it if it goes under a certain speed. But then you also can use fuel, petrol, diesel, whatever, whenever you're going on a longer journey. So it's actually the best of both worlds. But they're treating it as though it's the worst of all worlds. So I don't know about you, but once again, I'm afraid it looks as though the government have got this completely and utterly around its ears. So it turns out that Rachel Reeves may not know much about chess, or at least she may have gilded the lily slightly, but when it comes to electric cars, she has completely checkmated you. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to find a decent comment that I can read out about myself. Only joking. Obviously, we've got lots of comments. Loads of you have got lots to say on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter as well. This is from David. He says, "Hi, Mike. Can you get your program on radio somehow? I'm an HGV driver and I've listened to you for years. Fortunately, we're all not at home. Unfortunately, we're not all at home in an office or with laptops, and I'm a paid member of your Substack." Well, listen, we're going to work on that. We're going to work on all of that, working on apps and trying to figure out exactly how differently you might want to listen to the show. We'll try and do all that. Would be great if there was a live stream for radio, says Bethany. Not too hard to implement. Well, maybe you could help us with that. I don't know. Philip says, "Can't wait for you to get back into your proper studio. Let's get it on." And here's one from Jill. He says, "Just watched it. Put my reminder on just to watch you. Keep going, Mike. Love you. Stay safe." One here from Clive. He says, "Mike Graham back. What a legend. Labour makes me sick, giving train drivers big pay rises, junior doctors great big pay rises for their unions. Everyone else is struggling to live." And one here from Erica, who says, "Yes, Mike Graham's the best. Great to see you. Good luck in everything you do. We love you." That's very kind. On the doctor's strike, one from Bionic Rusty, who says, "In 2020, we lauded them as saviours and raised huge amounts of money for them. In 2025, they are allowing us to perish in great pain and or wither away." Absolutely dreadful. And here's one that says, "It's really great to see you back at work because you're not in the house anymore." That's from the wife. No, just joking. And one from here says, "Really enjoyed today's show," says Highlander. "Mike, every day it gets better and better. Your analysis is always informative and insightful. You can just be yourself now," says Miss Edie. "Get yourself a comfy chair and just do what you're good at. Rage, taking the mickey, let it come naturally." Well, I've got a chair now. We're building it as we go. We'll have it all ready for you pretty soon. And one here from Sue says, "Enjoying the serious format of your morning show without the insufferable commercial breaks. Well done. Also like the new hairdo." Yeah, I know it's a bit short, isn't it? I didn't quite mean for it to be cut this short, but there we are. Lots more of you have got so many great things to say. Not that many of you are having a go, actually, which is always quite nice. I mean, you get a few going, "Are you going to be talking about concrete?" Yeah, we will actually. In fact, we'll probably play the concrete clip at some point every now and again, maybe once a week. Concrete Corner. See you then. By the way, a note's just coming from the tech department that says if you want to listen to the show and you're a driver, a professional driver, as I know a lot of you are, you can basically put it on YouTube on your phone, link it through Bluetooth to the vehicle, and you can actually listen to it. Obviously, you can't watch it, but you can listen to it. You should be able to get the output that way. So we're only 20 days away from Christmas. An awful lot of people have already got their Christmas tree. And of course, that is always the beginning, isn't it, of the celebrations. And, you've got all the food to buy, whether you've got a turkey coming, whether you've got a chicken, whether you're going to get beef, whether you're going to get lamb. I know those conversations are all going on with my family. If you've got to get the presents in, have you done Black Friday, all of that stuff that you have to worry about. And of course, this year, thanks to Rachel Reeves, we're all probably thinking, well, we haven't got as much money as we thought we had, so we're going to have to be a bit careful, really. But of course, one of the most important things that you have to think about is just exactly how do you put the lights on the tree? How do you decorate the tree? Lots of people have lots of advice for you. Unfortunately, of course, there are certain people who aren't around to get advice from anymore. Margaret Thatcher, she's not here. Henry Kissinger, no longer with us. Bill Clinton, I wouldn't bother asking him. But there is someone who might be able to help us out. And I've got them right here. This is great.
Once a year.
Here it is.
Do the tree thing. Where's Ruth? She's the expert. Hi. How are you?
It's Meghan Markle
You are the tree spotter. So I need like 8 to 9.
buying a tree.
We'll have to wander here and see what we can find. I'll follow your lead. All right.
Oh, man. With love, Meghan. Harry! Harry! Oh, my God. Is there no end to this woman's talent? Now she can show us how to decorate a Christmas tree. Incredible. You know, because without that kind of advice, what would you do? What would you be doing? So you've got to check it out. It's the latest With Love, Meghan from Netflix and the Harry House of Horror. Yeah, so it's got 1 star as a review, right, from the Telegraph. This is from Anita Singh, Arts and Entertainment Editor. 1 star out of 5, right? It says Meghan's Christmas special is quite mad and a little bit sad. And they talk about how she's making a vegetable crudité wreath out of raw broccoli and desperation. I mean, broccoli's bad enough to eat. You don't want to make a complete wreath out of it, right? And apparently then it talks about the most awkward section of the hour-long special, which is called With Love, Meghan, Holiday Celebration, in which Meghan, as ever, tries way too hard. And then she says, you know, it is really quite a little bit sad because she goes on about how that she talks about once a year you get to do the tree thing, as we saw. It's the season to wrap gifts. And she talks about imparting gifts to people and spending the holidays with loved ones, determinedly ignoring the elephant in the room, which of course is that she's not really very friendly with either of her families, whether it's her own or Harry's, right? She goes, Christmas trees are able to really encapsulate your family story. Yeah, what? The one that you betrayed, you know, like she only ever sees her mother, not her father. Her father's never met her children, right? So their granddad's never met them. She doesn't speak to anybody else in the royal family, which is part of Harry's family, right? And she goes, I'm not sure how going non-contact with your father, moving 5,000 miles away from Britain because your husband hates his entire family, then giving a bombshell interview accusing your in-laws of being racist can be conveyed in baubles. Perhaps an angel tree topper in the shape of Oprah Winfrey. Presumably the new, thinner version of Oprah Winfrey rather than the old fat one. She's wearing a Cartier tank watch and a humdinger of a diamond. Meghan busies around the kitchen, laughing merrily at her own jokes. This feels like fondue, she says. Wary of being seen as Marie Antoinette, she says, I've never heard anyone say fondant. I mean, this woman's insane, isn't she? Unbelievable. Various guests greeted with Meghan's usual manic intensity. First up is restaurateur Will Guidara. Apparently she's called his wife to find out what her favourite food is, and apparently he loves pasta. Great. I mean, who makes this rubbish? Really? Guidara is the author of a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, and at one point he says to Meghan, sometimes people are working so hard to impress people they've invited over that they forget the actual reason people are there. It's just inane. It's constant rubbish. It's incredible. 2 of Meghan's friends come over for a pyjama party, which I didn't realise was a thing past the age of 12, says Anita. It's just awful. It makes you feel quite unwell. I suppose if you've got nothing better to do and you get to the point in Christmas Day where you've literally eaten as many mince pies as you can stomach and you're kind of lying there wondering if you're going to explode, maybe that's the time you put this on and watch it. It's really awful. It really is. It's possibly the worst television anyone's ever seen. Just give up. Well, that's a wrap for today. We'll bring you more Christmas updates between now, of course, and the next 3 to 4 weeks. Absolutely fantastic stuff. We're working hard, guys. Every time you see us, we're in a different place. But that's the nature of things at the moment. It's a bit peripatetic, as you might say, which is a big word. But it means that there's an awful lot going on beneath the surface, you know. We're literally like a swan on the lake. You know, the feet are going like mad underneath. But we're looking very, very cool upstairs. We'll see you soon.